Tonight, scrambling to contain the outbreak, the Defence Force arrives as Victoria sees its worst jump in cases for nearly 3 months. Tough talk on quarantine measures for COVID hotspot visitors to the NT, but no clear line on how the plan can be policed once borders open. Setting new records, 45,000 new COVID cases in the US, but the White House says it's making progress. And scientists cotton on to how to grow naturally coloured cotton. Good evening, Amy Culpitt with ABC News. Victoria has recorded its biggest daily rise in coronavirus cases since April as the state's worrying surge continues. There were another 41 confirmed cases in the past 24 hours, the 11th straight day of double-digit increases. And it's been confirmed a nurse in the Royal Melbourne Hospital Emergency Department has tested positive. It comes as the Defence Force lands in Melbourne to help with the testing blitz in the worst-hit suburbs. But with about a third of people in hotel quarantine refusing a test, pressure is building on the Victorian government to take a harder line. Nicole Asher reports.
Help has arrived in Melbourne, with the Defence Force joining the fight to control the worsening pandemic crisis.
We flew in last night as medical professionals to augment and assist wherever we can.
ADF medics have been deployed to testing sites in the city's hotspots. Mobile testing clinics have been stationed on street corners in Keilor Downs and Broadmeadows, where emergency alert text messages have been sent out. And the health department's door-knocking residents.
It's a bit chilling to find out that the people so close to you in your supermarkets and that are the most dangerous.
The Victorian government is hoping to test 10,000 people in these 10 hotspot suburbs alone every day for the next week.
Our aim for the next couple of weeks is to really find every single case and then get to a point where those cases peak and start going downwards.
But the surge in new cases continues. 41 overnight, including 15 from community transmission. There are now 204 active cases in Victoria, dwarfing all other states. As community testing ramps up, concerns are being raised about testing rates in Melbourne's quarantine hotels, where it's being revealed about a third of returned travellers have refused to be swabbed for the virus.
For people to not agree to do it, I think is reckless on their behalf, and I think it's quite selfish, and they should be thinking of the greater good.
The governments, through the National Cabinet, are discussing these very issues because it is important that we are able to test and to trace as many people as possible.
Returned travellers in New South Wales who refuse a coronavirus test will now have to stay in quarantine for a further 10 days.
Everybody should be on this journey with us. They should be tested, and they will be, because I think when it comes down to a choice between another 10 days in quarantine and being tested, I think everybody will take the testing.
My view is if people are in hotel quarantine and they refuse to take the test, we start charging them. We charge them for every night stay, we charge them for every meal.
The Victorian government is seeking legal advice on compulsory testing for people in hotel quarantine, but says that's not the cause for the rise in cases.
The evidence remains that we're not seeing cases in our community that have, for want of a better word, leaked out of hotel quarantine because they haven't been tested. We're just not seeing them.
With a week of this testing blitz still to come, the number of confirmed cases isn't expected to go down anytime soon. Nicole Asher, ABC News, Melbourne.
With just 3 weeks to go until the Territory reopens its borders, all eyes on interstate coronavirus hotspots. Yesterday, the NT government announced that people who arrive from those hotspots will have to self-quarantine. People who lie about where they've been could face harsh penalties, but it's unclear how authorities would be able to prove it.
It's been just 2 days since the Territory's peak medical body called the July border opening timeline sheer idiocy. And while it would still prefer an August date, new quarantine rules for coronavirus hotspots have softened its position.
Well, the AMA is understanding of the Chief Minister's position about having to protect the health of Territorians, but also having to try and stimulate the economy again.
A committee that advises the National Cabinet will decide what interstate council areas are declared hotspots. And once NT borders open on July 17, anyone who's been to a hotspot within the past 28 days will have to self-quarantine on arrival in the territory. People will fill out statutory declaration forms on arrival, and the government says anyone who lies about where they've been could face large fines or even 3 years prison.
If you lie on your information arrival form, we will catch you and you will face a heavy penalty.
But when asked how authorities would actually prove someone had lied, the health minister didn't have a clear answer.
I think it's, there's multiple ways. People will dob someone in. They'll ring up and provide that information. Or alternatively, if someone was to become ill, it'll quickly become apparent where they've been.
By the time they've got sick, they're likely to have infected a whole bunch of other people before they actually show up with symptoms. So I don't think that explanation is good enough, to be frank.
Instead of self-quarantine, the AMA wants hotspot arrivals put in mandatory hotel quarantine.
We would prefer that, given some of the people haven't complied with quarantine, yes.
While coronavirus has been clinically eliminated from the territory, the government says it's inevitable there'll be more cases in the coming months. But health authorities say they're prepared for all scenarios, including outbreaks at hospitals.
We have got hospitals ready, we've got ICU capability, we've got teams in hospitals that are dual teams so that we don't, if there's an infection in one person, it doesn't compromise the whole team.
Preparations that'll be put to the test in 3 weeks' time. Cameron Gooley, ABC News.
Thousands of West Australians have hit nightclubs, pubs and live music venues overnight after the further easing of coronavirus restrictions. Queues formed ahead of the reopening of venues at midnight as limits on crowd numbers were lifted and people were allowed to have a drink standing up at the bar. That included the Premier, who headed to a pub in his electorate, which was offering free meals to people named Mark to celebrate the easing of restrictions. Mark McGowan's arrival at the venue also ensured patrons received a free pint.
Cheers!
The Premier says while WA is leading the nation on the road to COVID-19 recovery, he won't be moving anytime soon to reopen its border.
We have to wait till there's very low rates of infection in the east and we get health advice that says it's appropriate that we open the hard border. At this point in time, that isn't there. I know everyone would like us to give a certain date, but I can't do that.
The WA government expects another lifting of restrictions in 3 weeks, which will include capacity crowds at large sporting venues. The US infectious disease chief says America has a serious problem. The country's just recorded its single biggest one-day rise in coronavirus cases since the pandemic began, eclipsing the previous record set only yesterday. In the last 24 hours, America recorded another 45,000 cases. Compare that to Australia, where we've had just 7,500 cases in total. And that's forcing some states to scale back reopening plans or reintroduce restrictions.
In Houston, they have a problem. At several hospitals, intensive care units are above 90% capacity.
The concern is where will we be in 2 and 3 weeks from now? And as we know with this virus, you have to act now to change what the situation will be in 3 weeks.
This city, like the rest of Texas, was quick to reopen. Now the entire state is again putting limits on restaurants and closing bars after recording more than 30,000 cases in the past week.
We find ourselves careening toward a catastrophic and unsustainable situation.
Florida, too, is restricting venues that sell alcohol after hitting a new daily high. In just 24 hours, roughly 8,900 people tested positive, many of them are young.
The number of cases from 25 to 34 have almost tripled just in less than a month now. So that's a really, really big group of folks.
In total, 29 states have rising case numbers, and based on antibody tests, officials estimate more than 20 million Americans could have been exposed to the virus since the pandemic began.
Our best estimate right now is that for every case that was reported, there actually were 10 other infections.
Amid the grim news, one of President Donald Trump's leading political allies urged people to wear masks.
Until we find a vaccine, these are really important.
And the nation's top coronavirus task force held its first briefing in several weeks, warning that even healthy Americans need to take the current situation seriously.
Because the chances are that if you get infected, that you're going to infect someone else.
The fear among some medical officials is with so many Americans travelling around the country on summer holidays over the next couple of months, the virus could be unknowingly spread to other states that are currently doing pretty well.
And that could make it much harder for this nation as it tries to return to normal. James Glenday, ABC News, Washington.
New satellite images released today appear to show China building a military camp in the Himalayas, the site of a fatal clash with Indian soldiers last week. The area is in the Himalayan region between China and India, called the Golwan Valley. The images were taken on Monday, a week after the initial clash. They show a large-scale expansion of buildings and hardware along the banks of the river at what is known as Patrol Point 14, while another image shows a tank company and artillery unit at a camp. Last week, dozens of soldiers were killed when troops clashed in the region. There are now growing calls in India to boycott Chinese products.
India's Ladakh region is vast, barren and beautiful. It's the perfect home for engineer Sonam Wangchuk, who spends his days promoting a simpler life. But recently, he's had other things on his mind.
Nothing we have against the people of China, the civilization of China, or even the goods and products of China. It's the regime that we enrich and empower by buying these goods.
Tensions have been building along the border for weeks, so Sonam Wangchuk took to YouTube, encouraging people to boycott Chinese products. The videos have received millions of views.
Every citizen is a soldier with their wallets and not bullets.
The Boycott China movement has since gained the support of celebrities such as cricketer Harbhajan Singh and film and television stars like South Indian actress Sakshi Agarwal.
What happened at the Golwan Valley is something that kind of really upset me.
There's a growing expectation that Chinese companies will be barred from key communications infrastructure projects, but India's ability to apply economic pressure on China is limited.
If it resorts to tariff actions, what's going to happen is that it is going to make a large number of essential imports expensive.
The two Asian giants are in de-escalation talks, but satellite imagery released this week suggests tensions aren't easing at all. Both sides have been captured bolstering troops and infrastructure along their hotly contested boundaries.
The very trigger point for this entire situation, I imagine, has been the fact that India has taken the initiative to catch up on the precise issue of infrastructure.
A high-stakes conflict in one of the most remote areas. James Oaten, ABC News.
Police have shot dead a suspect after a mass stabbing in Glasgow, the second such incident in the UK within a week. Armed police converged on a hotel housing asylum seekers after reports a man was attacking people with a knife. All up, 6 men were wounded in the attack and rushed to hospital, including a police officer. Scottish police have launched a full investigation but are not treating the incident as terrorism. Food relief charities are warning of another spike in need from the newly unemployed if stimulus measures wind up in the coming months. The sector is already struggling with rising demand as the pandemic drags on.
At this warehouse on the outskirts of Perth, volunteers are packing hampers for the growing number of people who can't afford to buy food.
Some staples. We've got big box of cereal, milk, tinned fruit and veg, rice, pasta, and since COVID, a couple of rolls of toilet paper.
Many started volunteering at the beginning of the pandemic just to do something useful to help.
It fills my cup, you know what I mean? It makes me feel like I'm contributing in some small way.
Demand across the country for food relief has continued to increase. Last month, 75% more people relied on food donations compared with pre-COVID levels.
We're also seeing a new wave and a new cohort of people coming in. So people that are unfortunately unemployed and have never had to rely on our services previously, now knocking on the door and saying, unfortunately, can you assist me?
This group's picking up food for the African student community. While some are back working casual jobs, many are still struggling because they're not eligible for government assistance.
It's very tough, especially for students who've not been able to keep the jobs. It's a really tough time for them.
At this university campus north of Perth, Guild President Elsa Chu has handed out 200 hampers since March.
Hi, how can I help you today?
She says many students are just scraping by.
Obviously, if their home country is not doing as good, there's no income from their parents and the parents can't send money over. So that's when they come in and they show much desperation.
Thanks to federal, community and corporate funds, Food Bank has been buying supplies because donations have plummeted, partly due to panic buying.
September, October is a real worry. Once you see potentially JobKeeper and JobSeeker stop, we're worried about what's going to happen. We're talking about it in the sector as the cliff.
Reaching that precipice will mean even more help's needed to keep people fed. Claire Moody, ABC News.
Australia's online habits have changed dramatically during the COVID-19 lockdown. A new report from the E-Safety Commissioner shows just how reliant we've become on the internet in our daily lives. The National Snapshot also reveals a serious rise in negative experiences online.
The internet has been a big part of life in lockdown for the Sang Savan family.
Hi, Vulcan. What's happened, everybody's now sort of working from home and also with the kids homeschooling, so it's pretty much a 24/7 thing.
Both work
You get the paperwork we sent you.
and play
I know.
are no longer confined to the physical world.
I liked it because, I can play with them and do other stuff with them.
According to a new survey by the E-Safety Commissioner, the number of Australians using the internet increased by 56% during the pandemic. The top reasons: news and health information, streaming video, work, social media and video calls with family and friends. Of the adults, parents were twice as likely to increase their use.
Well, I think we've all found that the internet was indispensable over COVID period. We wouldn't have been able to have that productivity that we've had or stay connected. And certainly social isolation was a big risk, particularly for those like older Australians.
But the research also found nearly 40% of Australians had a negative online experience in lockdown, with more than a quarter receiving repeated unwanted messages or contact, or were sent unwanted, inappropriate content.
With more people online, with more time on their hands, there's much more opportunity for malfeasance.
Despite the negative experiences, most Australians say they'll keep using the internet as much as they have been during lockdown, even as restrictions ease. Most say they'll stick to paying the bills, connecting with family and friends, and getting their news online.
The Zoom apps and a lot of the technologies that allows us to be able to do what we normally do, under social distancing circumstances. I think that would continue.
For many, life online is the new normal. Lydia Feng, ABC News.
Australian scientists have made a breakthrough they believe could transform the global textiles industry. They've discovered how to grow naturally coloured cotton. The scientists are also developing cotton that is stronger and more elastic. Tim Lee has this Landline exclusive.
In these few dozen Petri dishes are tiny plant cells that could transform the world's textile industry. This is coloured cotton, well, at least the beginnings of it.
So cotton is naturally white, but having the cotton plant produce its own coloured fibre is a game changer.
Plant biotech scientists at CSIRO in Canberra have inserted genes into white cotton. The results are startling.
Beautiful bright yellows, sort of goldeny orangey colours, all the way through to some really deep purple type colours as well.
These are tobacco plants bred with the coloured genes. It's proof that the leaves and, crucially, the fibre of this high-tech cotton will also be coloured. While it'll be some months before these plants are ready to flower, Australia's cotton industry is excited by the breakthrough.
The use of dyes is something that can have an impact on the environment, so to move to cotton that was naturally coloured through these scientific techniques would be a wonderful improvement and further enhance those green credentials.
The CSIRO scientists have other goals in sight, including wrinkle-free cotton that doesn't need ironing and elastic-type cotton that can compete with synthetic fibres.
So if we manage to make these amazing fibres that we're chasing, this can really have the potential to transform the global textile industry.
Just imagine Vast fields, not of white cotton, but beautiful shades of purple or gold. Tim Lee, ABC News, Canberra.
And you can see more of that story tomorrow on Landline at 12:30. The Sunshine Coast has the fastest growing number of young veterans in the country, but a support group says a severe lack of services has created a dangerous situation. Today is Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder Awareness Day, and the Veterans Group is leading the charge to increase support services for PTSD.
For Andy Fermo, story time with his daughter is a world away from the violence he endured as a commando in the Special Forces.
Did 2 tours of Afghanistan. On my second tour in particular, I was exposed to a few things and a few really traumatic incidences, including being blown up by an IED.
His mates were seriously injured in the incident. The 41-year-old was lucky to survive, but the psychological scars remained.
It sort of got to the point there where I still wanted to be doing my job, but I didn't want to commit career suicide by saying that anything was wrong.
Mr. Fermo was medically discharged the following year, but 3 months later, news of a deadly helicopter crash in Afghanistan pushed him over the edge.
I was in this shop and I just broke down crying, and all of a sudden everything just seemed really small. I had to get out of there, and then the noises, it was really crowded, being Sydney. And I just went to the car and broke down, crying.
He was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder.
20,000+ veterans, just veterans on the Sunny Coast. And a significant percentage of veterans will be suffering PTSD, and many of them wouldn't really know that or perhaps even acknowledge it.
The Sunshine Coast has the fastest growing number of young veterans in the country, but there is only one PTSD treatment program accredited by the Department of Veteran Affairs.
There's a huge need in the community, and there's not a lot of available treatment programs out there.
Tragically, by the time many veterans seek help, it's too late. According to Defence Department records, more than 400 veterans have taken their own life in the past 19 years.
They're the ones that we know about, and they're the ones that we can basically say 100% definitively that they are suicide. I believe that figure is higher.
Now hosting a podcast, Andy Fermo is doing his bit to help.
Bettering the well-being and mental health of veterans.
Giving a voice to others who struggle to find their own. Sally Rafferty, ABC News.
In the AFL, GWS and Collingwood have both lost key defenders to injury following last night's thrilling 2-point win for the Giants. Toby Green was in spectacular form for GWS with 3 goals as his team's better accuracy in front of the sticks led to a repeat of last year's tight preliminary final win. Giants skipper Phil Davis is likely to miss several weeks with a hamstring injury, while Collingwood's Jeremy Howe faces a lengthy stint on the sidelines after suffering an ugly knee injury in the match. In the NRL, it was a match to remember for the Cowboys, who broke a 3-game losing streak to beat the Knights. North Queensland halfback Jake Clifford was outstanding for the home side, putting on one of his best performances to date.
It looked like the Cowboys were in for a long afternoon against the Knights.
Now he's made a real hash of it.
But first impressions don't always last.
Out on the wing, Justin O'Neill.
What followed was the best half of football from a Queensland team this year.
Now the pass to the hammer. Goodbye!
Jonathan Thurston couldn't believe his eyes as his former club absolutely carved up Newcastle 26 points to 0 in the first half.
Through! Yes!
The Knights fought back in the second, but North Queensland held on to win 32 points to 20. Some Warriors players have asked to return to New Zealand after last night's 44-point loss to the Melbourne Storm.
There's a possibility that may happen. I'm not going to stand in their way. I don't think any of us are standing in their way.
The Warriors' plight hasn't gone unnoticed. Melbourne captain Cameron Smith and coach Craig Bellamy spoke to the New Zealanders after the match.
I think everyone in the game feels for the Warriors.
The coronavirus is also having an impact on the Storm. The club's relocated to the Sunshine Coast due to the tightening of COVID-19 restrictions in Melbourne. 5'8" Cameron Munster hasn't had scans on his injured knee yet, and he could miss 1 to 6 weeks depending on results. They'll host the Roosters at Lang Park on Thursday night, who have much bigger injury problems.
He knew straight away there was an issue.
Lock Victor Radley and utility Sam Verrills both suffered ACL injuries and will likely miss the rest of the season. The playing surface looked worse for wear, but the club denied making a formal complaint to the NRL.
Someone said that we made a formal complaint about it, which is complete nonsense.
The Roosters dug deep to beat the Dragons 26 points to 12. Michael Rennie, ABC News.
If you think you're having a rough pandemic, spare a thought for this mum of 8 who just had triplets in the middle of a lockdown. Her high-risk pregnancy meant she had to spend months in hospital separated from her older children, who were isolated in a remote North Queensland community 850 kilometres away.
Raising 8 children doesn't leave a lot of time for much else.
I've got a heck of a lot of love for my children and a lot of patience, and one little guy is going.
Alicia B's big family just got bigger.
It would be a 1 in 500,000 chance of having twins followed by triplets all spontaneously.
Miss B's 5 older kids, including 1-year-old twins, were meant to come with her to hospital, but COVID-19 made that impossible. Her Cape York hometown has been in lockdown since March to protect its large Indigenous community.
It adds another layer of complexity on to what always is difficult for rural and very remote women.
It's been a wild ride for everyone. Elijah, Jackson and Jet arrived at 25 weeks. Mum got here in April and won't leave until August.
People have been offering a lot to help me out and support if I ever need it, but I've just been saying I've got it. I'm pretty happy doing it all alone.
And she can't wait to have all 8 kids under one roof.
And this supermum isn't done yet. She says that she's always wanted a big family, so she might take a break for a couple of years and then try for another 2 to make it a nice round 10.
If more bundles of joy are on the way, these boys will have to learn to share the limelight. Siobhan Henu, ABC News, Townsville.
Now to the weather. It was a cool and frosty start to the day in Central Australia, dry and sunny elsewhere across the territory. The humidity in Darwin crept up again this afternoon. Temperatures reached 33 degrees after the overnight low of 21, with tops of 34 for inland centres. Freezing early in Alice Springs. It was the coldest morning for the year. Temperatures dropped to -1 with a top of 19 this afternoon. Tennant Creek and Rabbit Flat were 26, Snooker and Borroloola both with tops of 32. Taking a look around the country today, Adelaide and Sydney reached 17, Brisbane was 24, and it only got up to 11 degrees today in Canberra. Mostly sunny across Australia, cloud increasing over WA with some cloud along the east coast and into the eastern top end. A high over Victoria will be slow moving and will direct easterly winds across the territory, while a strong cold front will cross Perth tomorrow morning. Interstate tomorrow, rain for Brisbane and Sydney, sunny in Adelaide and Hobart, with a cold day and some fog in Melbourne, 14. To our north, storms for Singapore with a top of 34, rain in Dili, 29, and Jakarta is expected to reach 31 degrees. Back home, another freezing night in Alice Springs, 18 the top there tomorrow, Tennant Creek, 25, and Elliot, 28. Further north, Katherine, 32, Maningrida, 31, Nhulunbuy, 29, and a cool day in Numbulwar, 27 degrees. Down to 22 tonight in Darwin, 32 the top here tomorrow. Dundee Beach and Wadair both expected to reach 32 degrees as well. High tide tomorrow will be at around 11 a.m, with the low of more than 2.5 metres at 5:45 in the evening. Sunrise will be at 7 minutes past 7 and set at 6:32. And looking ahead for Darwin, there is a very slight chance of a shower about the coast tomorrow and Monday. Afternoon sea breezes will increase the humidity overnight, which could see some morning fog, mainly in the rural area. And in Alice Springs, another cold and frosty morning or two on the way, becoming warmer as winds turn northerly ahead of a southerly change at the end of the week. And to stay up to date with the latest news from the Northern Territory, head to our website news.abc.net.au. And that's ABC News for this Saturday night. Thanks for your company. Good night.